The dust rising from the wagon trail caught Caroline's attention even before she heard the hoofbeats. And in that moment of hesitation between hope and fear, she wondered if this stranger would be their salvation or another burden she could not afford to carry. It was June 1878 in Sierra Vista, Arizona Territory, and the unforgiving sun beat down on the small homestead Caroline Jenkins had been struggling to maintain for the past 3 months. Her father, Thomas Jenkins, lay in the bedroom inside their modest wooden house, his breathing labored and shallow as the fever continued its relentless assault on his weakened body. What had started as a simple cough during the spring had progressed into something far more sinister, leaving Caroline to manage the property, tend to the animals, and nurse her father around the clock with barely any sleep and no help from anyone. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead as she straightened from the vegetable garden she had been desperately trying to keep alive. The tomatoes were wilting despite her efforts, and the beans looked scraggly and weak. Water was scarce. Her father's medicine cost more than she could afford, and the small amount of money they had saved was dwindling faster than snow in summer. The rider came closer, and Caroline could make out more details now. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the harsh afternoon light. His horse was a handsome chestnut mare, well kept and strong, suggesting this was no drifter passing through. As he approached the fence line of their property, he slowed his mount and removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Afternoon, miss," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Name's Cole Fletcher. I'm looking for the Jenkins place." Caroline's heart sank. Another creditor, perhaps, or someone her father owed money to from his days working the silver mines before his health had failed. She set down the bucket she had been carrying and walked toward the fence, squaring her shoulders despite her exhaustion. "This is the Jenkins property," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm Caroline Jenkins. If you're here about money owed, I'm afraid you'll have to wait. My father is ill, and we don't have anything to spare right now." Cole Fletcher replaced his hat and dismounted with an easy grace that spoke of years spent in the saddle. Up close, Caroline could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of sage that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were dusty from travel but well made, and he wore a gun belt with a practiced ease that suggested he knew how to use it. "I'm not here about money," he said, his expression softening. "I knew your father years back. We worked the mines together up in Tombstone before I took to ranching. I was passing through town and heard from the doctor that Thomas was in a bad way. Thought I'd come by and see if there was anything I could do to help." The kindness in his voice was almost Caroline's undoing. She had been holding herself together through sheer willpower for so long that the offer of help, genuine and freely given, threatened to crack the walls she had built around her emotions. She blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall in front of this stranger. "That's kind of you," she managed, "but I'm managing fine." Even as she said it, a board on the chicken coop behind her chose that moment to come loose with a loud crack, and 3 hens scattered into the yard with indignant squawks. The water pump by the house dripped steadily, wasting precious water because she had not had time to fix the seal. The vegetable garden looked half dead, and she knew the barn needed mucking out because she had not had the strength to do it properly in days. Cole Fletcher looked around the property with an assessing eye that missed nothing, but there was no judgment in his gaze when it returned to her. "Miss Jenkins, I don't mean any disrespect, but it looks like you could use a hand. Your father was good to me when I was green and didn't know a thing about mining. He showed me the ropes and probably saved my life more than once when I was too foolish to see danger coming. I'd like to repay that kindness if you'll let me." Caroline wanted to refuse. She had been raised to be independent, to handle her own problems without burdening others. But the truth was, she was drowning. The work was too much for one person, especially when that person was also spending half the night sitting up with a sick parent, brewing medicines, changing sweat-soaked sheets, and listening anxiously to every labored breath. "I can't pay you," she said quietly. "We barely have enough for Father's medicine and food." "I'm not asking for payment," Cole replied. "I've got my own place about 15 miles north of here. It's small but doing well enough. I can spare a few days to help out a friend, and I'd consider it a privilege to do so." Caroline studied his face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives or false charity, but she saw only genuine concern and determination. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "But just until we're caught up on the essential work. I don't want to take advantage of your generosity." Cole smiled then, a warm expression that transformed his serious face. "You're not taking advantage of anything, Miss Jenkins. Now, why don't you go check on your father and maybe get yourself some rest? You look like you could use both." "I'll start with that chicken coop and work my way through what needs doing out here." Caroline wanted to argue, to insist she could handle everything herself, but her body betrayed her with a wave of exhaustion so profound, she swayed slightly on her feet. Cole noticed immediately and reached out to steady her, his hand gentle on her elbow. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. She tried to remember and could not. "I've been eating," she said defensively, though even she could hear how weak the protest sounded. "Right," Cole said, clearly not believing her. "Tell you what, you go see to your father and I'll handle things out here. When I'm done with the immediate repairs, I'll head into town for supplies and bring back some food. We can discuss the rest of the work over supper." The mention of food made Caroline's stomach clench with hunger she had been ignoring. She realized that she had been subsisting on whatever scraps were easiest to prepare, giving the better portions to her father in hopes that proper nutrition would help him fight off the illness. "I should help," she said, but her protest was half-hearted. "You are helping," Cole told her firmly. "You're helping by taking care of your father and by having the sense to accept assistance when it's offered. There's no shame in that, Miss Jenkins. Now go on. I've got work to do." Caroline watched as he turned and headed toward the chicken coop, pulling tools from his saddlebags with efficient movements. For the first time in months, she felt a small flutter of hope in her chest. Maybe they would be all right after all. She made her way back to the house, her steps a little lighter despite her exhaustion. Inside, the air was stuffy and warm, and she could hear her father's labored breathing from the bedroom. She poured fresh water into a basin and dampened a cloth, then went to his bedside. Thomas Jenkins had once been a strong, vital man, but illness had reduced him to a shadow of his former self. His face was gaunt, his cheeks hollowed, and his skin had a grayish pallor that frightened Caroline every time she looked at him. He stirred as she placed the cool cloth on his forehead, his eyes fluttering open. "Caroline," he whispered, his voice raspy, "you should be resting, girl. You're working yourself to death." "I'm fine, Papa," she said, forcing a smile, "and I have good news. A friend of yours came by, Fletcher. He says you worked the mines together. He's offered to help with the property for a few days." Her father's eyes sharpened with recognition despite his fever. "Fletcher," he murmured. "Good man. Saved his life once when a support beam gave way. Pulled him out of the way just in time." He gripped Caroline's hand with surprising strength. Let him help, Caroline. Don't be too proud. Cole's the type who means what he says. I will, Papa, she promised. Now rest. I'm going to make you some broth. She spent the next hour in the kitchen, preparing a nourishing broth from the chicken she had managed to keep alive and some of the vegetables that were still edible. Through the window, she could see Cole working on the chicken coop, his movements sure and capable. He had already repaired the broken board and was reinforcing the others, making the structure sturdier than it had been in months. As the broth simmered, Caroline allowed herself to really look at their visitor. Cole Fletcher was undeniably handsome, with strong features and an ease of movement that came from a life spent working hard. But more than his physical appearance, there was something solid and reliable about him that called to something deep inside her. In a land where men often proved to be as changeable as the desert wind, Cole seemed like bedrock, steady and immovable. She shook her head at her own thoughts. This was hardly the time to be thinking about a man in romantic terms. Her father was ill, their situation was precarious, and Cole had made it clear he was here out of loyalty to an old friend. Nothing more. She carried the broth to her father and helped him eat a few spoonfuls before he drifted back to sleep, exhausted by even that small effort. Caroline sat by his bedside for a while, holding his hand and listening to his breathing, praying silently that he would recover. When she finally returned to the kitchen, the sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. Cole was no longer working on the chicken coop. Instead, he had moved to the barn, and she could hear the rhythmic sounds of mucking and sweeping. He had also repaired the water pump, she noticed. The steady drip had stopped. Caroline felt a lump form in her throat. This stranger had done more in a few hours than she had been able to manage in days. She set about preparing a proper meal with what ingredients they had, determined to at least feed Cole a decent supper in thanks for his help. By the time he finished in the barn and came to the house to wash up, Caroline had managed to put together a respectable meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of their salted pork. It was not fancy, but it was filling and hot, which was more than she had managed for herself in quite some time. Cole appeared at the door, his hat in his hands, looking slightly uncertain. "Don't mean to intrude on your home, Miss Jenkins, but I thought I might wash up at the pump if that's all right." "Please come in," Caroline said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You've done so much work today. The least I can do is offer you a place to wash properly and a hot meal." He smiled gratefully and stepped inside, taking in the modest interior of the house with respectful eyes. Caroline showed him to the wash basin, giving him privacy to clean up while she set the table. When he emerged, his face scrubbed clean and his hair dampened and combed back. She was struck again by how handsome he was. They sat down to eat, and for a moment there was awkward silence. Caroline was not used to having guests, especially male guests, and Cole seemed equally uncertain about the social niceties of the situation. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Your father is a good man," he said. "I meant what I said earlier. He saved my life in those mines. I was 20 years old and thought I knew everything. Didn't pay attention to the warning signs that a tunnel was unstable. Thomas saw what I missed and yanked me out of the way seconds before the ceiling came down. If not for him, I'd have been buried alive." Caroline felt her eyes sting with tears. "He never mentioned that, but that sounds like Papa. He always looked out for others." "How long has he been sick?" Cole asked gently. 3 months, Caroline said, her voice thick with emotion. "At first it was just a cough. He said it was nothing, just dust in his lungs from the mines. But it got worse. By the time I convinced him to see the doctor, the fever had set in. Dr. Hartwell says it's pneumonia, maybe something worse. He's doing everything he can, but the medicine is expensive and Papa isn't getting better." What about other family? Cole asked. Brothers, sisters, anyone who could help, Caroline shook her head. My mother died when I was 12. It's just been Papa and me since then. We moved out here 5 years ago, hoping the dry air would be good for his lungs. It helped for a while, but now. She trailed off, not wanting to voice her fears. Cole reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the gesture warm and comforting. You're not alone anymore, he said firmly. I'm here to help, and I'm not going anywhere until your father is better and this place is in good order. I meant what I said about owing him a debt. Please let me repay it. Caroline looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and determination. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and Cole squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. They finished their meal in more comfortable silence, and then Cole insisted on helping her clean up despite her protests. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, Caroline found herself acutely aware of his presence. He moved with a careful grace, mindful not to crowd her in the small space, but every time their hands brushed or their shoulders touched, she felt a spark of something she had not experienced in a long time. I should ride back to my place tonight, Cole said as they finished putting away the last of the dishes. I need to check on my livestock and gather some supplies, but I'll be back first thing in the morning and I'll bring more food and anything else you might need. Is there anything specific? Caroline thought for a moment. If you have any spare medical supplies, that would help, and we're low on lamp oil. But please, don't spend your own money on us. We'll find a way to manage. Cole gave her a look that was equal parts exasperation and affection. Miss Jenkins, I'm going to say this once, so please listen. I'm not offering charity. I'm repaying a debt and helping a friend. If the situations were reversed, your father would do the same for me without a second thought. So please, let me help without arguing about every little thing. Caroline felt her cheeks flush, partly from embarrassment and partly from something else she could not quite name. You're right, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I'm not used to accepting help. It's just been Papa and me for so long, and I've always had to be strong and handle everything myself. Cole's expression softened. Being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone, he said gently. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit you need help and let others stand beside you. His words struck something deep inside Caroline, and she felt tears begin to fall despite her best efforts to hold them back. Months of fear, exhaustion, and loneliness came pouring out in great, gasping sobs that she could not control. She was mortified to be breaking down in front of this man she barely knew, but she could not seem to stop. Cole did not hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, holding her securely while she cried into his chest. He did not say anything, just let her release all the pent-up emotion she had been carrying. His hand moved in slow, soothing circles on her back, and his steady presence was exactly what she needed. When the storm of tears finally subsided, Caroline pulled back, wiping at her eyes with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice hoarse. I don't know what came over me. Don't apologize, Cole said firmly. You've been carrying a heavy burden all alone. It's about time you had someone to share it with. Caroline looked up at him, seeing nothing but understanding and compassion in his eyes. In that moment, something shifted between them, an invisible thread connecting them that had not been there before. She realized with a start that she was attracted to this man, deeply and genuinely attracted in a way she had not been to anyone in years. From the bedroom, her father called out weakly, and the moment was broken. Caroline stepped back, smoothing her dress and trying to compose herself. I should check on him, she said. Of course, Cole replied. I'll head out now and be back at first light. Try to get some rest, Caroline. That's an order. He smiled to show he was teasing, and Caroline found herself smiling back despite everything. "I'll try," she promised. She walked him to the door and watched as he mounted his horse. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Cole touched the brim of his hat in farewell, and Caroline raised her hand in response, watching until he disappeared down the trail. For the first time in months, she went to bed that night feeling something other than despair. Hope was a fragile thing, but it was there, kindled by the kindness of a stranger who had become something more in the span of a single afternoon. Cole returned at dawn the next morning, just as he had promised. Caroline was already up, having spent another restless night tending to her father, who had been more feverish than usual. She heard the sound of wagon wheels rather than hoofbeats, and looked out to see Cole driving a sturdy wagon loaded with supplies. He pulled up to the house and began unloading crates and sacks with efficient movements. Caroline hurried outside, her eyes widening at the amount of goods he had brought. "Cole, this is too much," she protested as she saw flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, fresh vegetables, lamp oil, and what looked like enough food to last them for weeks. "It's exactly enough," Cole said firmly, continuing to unload. "You can't take care of your father if you're weak from hunger. Besides, I brought work to do, so I'll be eating some of this too." He carried the supplies into the house, stacking them neatly in the kitchen while Caroline followed, overwhelmed by his generosity. When everything was inside, he turned to her with a serious expression. "How was your father last night?" "Not good," Caroline admitted. "His fever was higher and he was restless. I managed to get some water into him, but he could not eat anything." Cole frowned. "I stopped by Dr. Hartwell's office early this morning. He's going to come out this afternoon to check on Thomas." "I already paid for the visit, so don't even think about arguing with me about it." Caroline opened her mouth to do exactly that, then closed it again, remembering his words from the night before about accepting help. Instead, she said simply, "Thank you." Cole's stern expression melted into a smile. "You're welcome. Now, why don't you show me what else needs doing around here, and we'll make a plan of attack." They spent the morning working together, Caroline showing Cole the various tasks that had been piling up. The fence line needed repairs in several places. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges. The well pump needed a new handle, and the garden needed to be properly watered and weeded. It was an overwhelming amount of work for two people, let alone one woman caring for a sick father. Cole tackled each job with steady determination, and Caroline found herself working alongside him despite his protests that she should rest. The truth was, being active felt good after so many weeks of feeling helpless. Working beside Cole, she felt capable again, like she was taking back control of her life, instead of being swept along by circumstances beyond her control. As they worked, they talked. Cole told her about his small ranch, how he had saved every penny from his mining days to buy the land and a small herd of cattle. He spoke of his dreams to expand, to build something lasting that he could be proud of. Caroline shared stories of her childhood, of her mother's gentle nature and her father's quiet strength, of learning to be tough and independent in a land that did not forgive weakness. Dr. Hartwell arrived in the early afternoon, a portly man with kind eyes and capable hands. Cole and Caroline waited anxiously in the kitchen while he examined Thomas. When he emerged, his expression was grave. "The pneumonia has progressed," he said without preamble. "His lungs are badly congested and the fever is weakening his heart. I'm not going to lie to you, Miss Jenkins. The next few days will be critical. If we can break the fever and clear his lungs, he has a chance. But it's going to take constant care, and even then, there are no guarantees." Caroline felt the floor shift beneath her feet, and Cole's hand was suddenly there, steadying her. "What do we need to do?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain calm. Dr. Hartwell pulled out several bottles of medicine and explained the dosing schedule. "He needs to be kept cool when the fever spikes, warm when he gets chills. Try to get fluids into him as much as possible. The medicine will help with the congestion, but his body has to fight this off. He's not a young man anymore, and years in the mines have weakened his lungs. But he's strong and he has good care. That counts for a lot." After the doctor left, Caroline went to sit with her father while Cole put away his tools and tended to the animals. Thomas was awake but barely coherent, mumbling words that made no sense. Caroline bathed his face with cool water and got him to swallow some of the medicine, then sat holding his hand, willing her strength into him. She must have dozed off in the chair because the next thing she knew, gentle hands were lifting her. She stirred in confusion, realizing Cole was carrying her toward her own bedroom. "You can't take care of him if you collapse from exhaustion," Cole said softly. "I'm going to sit with Thomas for a while. You need to sleep in a proper bed, even if it's just for a few hours." But Caroline started to protest. "No arguments," Cole said firmly. "I'll wake you if there's any change, I promise." He set her gently on her bed and pulled a quilt over her. The last thing Caroline remembered before sleep claimed her was the sight of Cole's concerned face and the warmth of his hand brushing hair back from her forehead. When she woke, the light outside her window suggested several hours had passed. She sat up quickly, momentarily disoriented, then remembered Cole sitting with her father. She hurried to the bedroom and found Cole in the chair beside the bed, a damp cloth in his hand as he tended to Thomas with surprising gentleness. "Any change?" she asked quietly from the doorway. Cole looked up and the expression on his face made her heart skip. "His breathing seems a little easier," he said. "The fever is still high, but I think the medicine is helping. He woke up once and was more lucid. Asked for you, but I told him you were resting. He seemed satisfied with that." Caroline moved to her father's side, taking his hand. His skin was still too warm, but Cole was right. His breathing did seem less labored than before. She felt a surge of hope. "You should eat something," Cole said, standing and stretching. "I made some stew from the supplies. It's staying warm on the stove." "You cooked?" Caroline asked, surprised. Cole grinned. "Don't sound so shocked. I've been taking care of myself for years. I'm no fancy chef, but I can make a decent stew." They took turns that evening, one sitting with Thomas while the other ate or tended to necessary chores. Cole had been right about the stew. It was simple but hearty and delicious, and Caroline realized she was ravenously hungry. As night fell, they established a routine. Caroline would take the first watch while Cole got some rest on the settee in the front room. Then Cole would take over around midnight, letting Caroline sleep until dawn. It was not ideal, but it meant Thomas was never alone and both of them got at least some rest. The days began to blur together. Thomas's condition fluctuated, sometimes better, sometimes worse, keeping them both on edge. But having Cole there made all the difference. He handled the heavy work around the property, made sure they both ate regularly, and provided steady, calm support during the worst moments when Thomas's fever spiked dangerously high. During the quiet hours when Thomas slept peacefully, Cole and Caroline talked. They shared stories, dreams, fears, and hopes. Caroline learned that Cole had been orphaned young and raised by an uncle who taught him ranching. He had struck out on his own at 18, worked the mines to save money, and bought his land at 23. He was 26 now, and he spoke with pride about what he had built. Caroline told him about her mother's death, how it had devastated both her and her father. She had been forced to grow up quickly, learning to cook, clean, and manage a household at an age when most girls were still playing with dolls. She had never minded, though. Her father had needed her, and she had stepped up. "Did you ever think about marrying?" Cole asked one evening as they sat on the porch, stealing a few moments of rest while Thomas slept. Caroline shrugged. "There was a man once, a few years back. He worked for the telegraph company. He courted me for a while, but when Papa got sick the first time, he disappeared. Said he was not interested in taking on that kind of responsibility. After that, I decided I was better off alone." "He was a fool," Cole said with quiet intensity. "Any man would be lucky to have you." Caroline felt heat rise to her cheeks and was grateful for the darkness that hid her blush. "What about you?" she asked, deflecting. "I'm surprised some woman has not snapped you up by now." Cole was quiet for a moment. "I came close once," he said finally. "A rancher's daughter from up near Tucson. Pretty girl, good family, we were even talking about marriage. But when it came down to it, she wanted me to sell my place and work for her father. She could not understand why I needed my own land, my own legacy. We parted ways, and I have not really looked at another woman since." "Until now," Caroline said softly, the words out before she could stop them. Cole turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "Until now," he agreed. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken possibilities. Caroline found herself leaning closer, drawn by some force she could not name. Cole's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her skin. "Caroline," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know this is not the right time, and I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know. From the moment I saw you standing in that garden, fighting to keep everything together despite impossible odds, I felt something I have never felt before. You're the strongest, most courageous woman I have ever met, and I find myself thinking about you constantly." Caroline's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way about anyone, especially not now with everything that is happening. But you make me feel like maybe, just maybe, there is happiness waiting on the other side of all this." Cole leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Caroline did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that surprised her. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened as they both gave in to the feelings they had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "We'll get through this," he promised. "Your father is going to recover, and when he does, I want to court you properly. I want to do this right." "I would like that," Caroline said, her voice full of emotion. They sat together on the porch for a while longer, holding hands and talking quietly about the future they both hoped was possible. For the first time since her father fell ill, Caroline allowed herself to imagine a life beyond endless worry and exhausting work. She imagined a life with Cole, building something together, facing whatever challenges came with a partner by her side. The next morning brought a change they had been praying for. Thomas's fever broke during the night, and when Caroline checked on him at dawn, his forehead was cool to the touch for the first time in days. His eyes opened when she entered, and they were clear and focused. "Caroline," he said, his voice weak but coherent. "What happened?" "How long have I been sick?" Caroline felt tears of relief streaming down her face as she took his hand. "A while, Papa, but you're going to be all right now. The fever has broken." Cole appeared in the doorway, and Thomas turned his head to look at him. "Cole Fletcher," he said, a weak smile crossing his face. "I thought I dreamed you being here." "No dream, Thomas," Cole said, moving to stand beside Caroline. "You saved my life once. Figured it was time I returned the favor." "You've been taking care of my girl," Thomas said, and it was not a question. "Someone needed to," Cole replied. "She's been trying to do everything herself, running herself into the ground." Thomas looked between them, his experienced eyes taking in the way they stood close together, the way their hands were almost touching. "I see," he said, and there was approval in his voice. "Caroline could do worse than a good man like you, Cole Fletcher." Caroline blushed furiously. "Papa, it's not like that. Cole was just helping." "It is exactly like that," Thomas said, a hint of his old strength returning to his voice. "And I approve. Life's too short to waste time, Caroline. If you have found someone who makes you happy, you hold on to that with both hands." Over the following days, Thomas continued to improve. His strength returned slowly but steadily, and Dr. Hartwell proclaimed him out of danger, though he would need several more weeks of rest before he could return to normal activities. Cole continued to come by daily, handling the heavy work around the property and officially courting Caroline with her father's blessing. They took walks in the evening, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Cole brought her wildflowers he picked on his rides between his ranch and the Jenkins place. Caroline cooked his favorite meals and mended his shirts. They were learning each other, building a foundation for something lasting. One evening, about 3 weeks after Thomas's fever broke, Cole asked Caroline to take a ride with him. They rode out to a ridge that overlooked both properties, his ranch to the north and her father's homestead to the south. The sun was setting, painting the landscape in brilliant colors. "I've been thinking," Cole said as they stood side by side, their horses grazing nearby. "Your father is going to need help running his place for a while yet. Even when he is fully recovered, it's too much work for one man." "I know," Caroline said quietly. "I've been worried about that. We might have to sell and find a smaller place, though the thought breaks my heart. Papa loves this land." Cole turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "What if you did not have to sell? What if you had help, permanent help?" Caroline's heart began to race. "What are you suggesting?" Cole took a deep breath. "Marry me, Caroline. Let me help you and your father not just for a few weeks, but for the rest of our lives. My ranch and this land together would make a good spread, enough to support all of us comfortably. We could build a life together, a real partnership." Caroline felt tears spring to her eyes. "Cole, I do not want you to marry me out of obligation or because you feel you owe my father." "That's not why I am asking," Cole said firmly. "I am asking because I love you. I have loved you since that first day when you stood your ground, exhausted and scared but refusing to give up. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination. I love the way you care for your father, the way you fight for what matters. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you if you will have me." "Yes," Caroline said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Cole. I did not think I could feel this way, but you showed me that I could still hope, still dream, still love." Cole pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and promises for the future into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. They rode back to the house to tell Thomas the news. He was sitting on the porch, looking stronger each day, and his face broke into a wide smile when they announced their engagement. "About time," he said gruffly, though his eyes were suspiciously bright. "When's the wedding?" "Soon," Cole said, glancing at Caroline for confirmation. "If Caroline agrees, I would like to marry as soon as possible. I am tired of riding back and forth between properties. I want to be here with my family." 6 weeks, Caroline said. "That will give us time to prepare and for Papa to regain more of his strength. I want him to walk me down the aisle." Thomas stood, still a bit shaky but determined, and embraced them both. "You've made an old man very happy," he said. Cole, I could not ask for a better man for my daughter. You proved your worth and your character these past weeks. I know you will take good care of her. I will, Cole promised. You have my word. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Cole moved most of his operation to the Jenkins property, combining the two spreads and making both more efficient. He hired a couple of hands to help with the work, young men from town who were grateful for steady employment. Caroline worked on preparing for the wedding, sewing a new dress with fabric Cole insisted on buying for her despite her protests. News of the engagement spread through Sierra Vista, and Caroline was surprised by how many people reached out to offer congratulations and assistance. She had thought of herself as alone, but the community rallied around them, excited about the upcoming wedding. Mrs. Peterson from the general store offered to make the wedding cake. The minister's wife helped with decorations. Even the cantankerous owner of the saloon donated whiskey for the celebration. Thomas continued to recover, regaining his strength day by day. The doctor said it was remarkable, attributing his improvement not just to the medicine, but to having something to look forward to. Thomas threw himself into preparing for the wedding with enthusiasm, determined to be strong enough to fulfill his role. The day before the wedding, Cole's uncle arrived from up north, a grizzled rancher named Walter Fletcher who looked intimidating but proved to have a heart of gold. He took one look at Caroline and declared that his nephew had chosen well, then proceeded to regale them with embarrassing stories about young Cole that made everyone laugh. The wedding took place on a beautiful September morning. The small church in Sierra Vista was packed with well-wishers, the whole town seemingly turning out for the event. Caroline wore her new dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored fabric, with wildflowers in her hair. Thomas, still thin but steady on his feet, walked her down the aisle with pride shining in his eyes. Cole stood at the altar looking handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Caroline as she approached. When she reached him, he took her hand, and the love in his eyes made her heart soar. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through all the challenges life might bring. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation were seen wiping their eyes. The celebration afterward was joyous. Tables had been set up outside the church, laden with food that the townspeople had contributed. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts. Thomas gave a speech that had everyone simultaneously laughing and crying, talking about how proud he was of his daughter and how grateful he was to have Cole as a son. As the sun began to set, Cole and Caroline slipped away from the celebration, riding to the ridge where he had proposed. They sat together watching the sunset, finally alone as husband and wife. "Happy?" Cole asked, pulling her close. "More than I ever thought possible," Caroline replied honestly. 3 months ago, I thought my life was over, that I would spend it alone watching my father die. And now look at us. Your strength saved him, Cole said, and your courage to accept help brought us together. I am the luckiest man alive, Caroline Fletcher. She smiled at hearing her new name. I love the sound of that. Mrs. Cole Fletcher. They stayed on the ridge until full dark, talking about their plans for the future. They would continue building up the combined ranch, maybe start breeding horses in addition to cattle. They would care for Thomas, making sure he had a comfortable retirement. And someday, they would fill the house with children, creating the family they both longed for. Over the next year, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Cole proved to be not just a capable rancher, but an excellent businessman, making smart decisions that increased their income. Caroline managed the household and books with efficiency, while also taking an active role in the ranch operations. Thomas regained most of his strength and found purpose in mentoring the young ranch hands Cole had hired. The following spring, Caroline discovered she was pregnant. The joy this news brought to the entire household was immeasurable. Cole was simultaneously thrilled and terrified, fussing over Caroline constantly until she finally had to tell him firmly that she was pregnant, not dying, and perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. Thomas was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He immediately began crafting a cradle, spending hours in the barn creating an heirloom piece that would hold his grandchild. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Cole was attentive and loving, constantly amazed by the changes in Caroline's body and the life growing inside her. They spent evenings planning for their child, deciding on names and arguing playfully about whether the baby would have Cole's eyes or Caroline's smile. On a cold November night in 1879, Caroline went into labor. Cole paced anxiously while the doctor attended to her, Thomas keeping him company and sharing stories about Caroline's own birth to distract him. After several hours, a baby's cry pierced the air, and Dr. Hartwell emerged with a smile. "You have a son," he announced. "A healthy, strong boy." And Caroline did wonderfully. Cole rushed into the bedroom to find Caroline exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. His son. Their son. Cole felt his eyes fill with tears as he looked at his family. "Meet Christopher Thomas Fletcher," Caroline said softly. "Named for his father and grandfather." "He's perfect," Cole whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. Christopher's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's finger, and Cole felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for him, for us, for everything." Thomas came in to meet his grandson, and the emotion on the old man's face was almost too much to bear. He held little Christopher with hands that trembled, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "Welcome to the world, little one," he said. "You've got quite a legacy to live up to, with a mother as brave as yours and a father as honorable as yours. But I have a feeling you are going to be just fine." The first few months of parenthood were challenging but wonderful. Cole proved to be a devoted father, getting up for middle-of-the-night feedings and diaper changes without complaint. Caroline marveled at seeing her strong cowboy husband cradling their tiny son with such gentleness. Thomas doted on his grandson, spending hours telling Christopher stories even though the baby was far too young to understand. He had a way of getting the infant to stop crying that neither Caroline nor Cole could replicate, and he took pride in his ability to soothe his grandchild. As Christopher grew from infant to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Cole's reputation as an honest businessman and skilled rancher grew, and they began receiving offers to supply cattle to various buyers throughout the territory. The financial security this brought allowed them to make improvements to both the house and the ranch operations. When Christopher was 2 years old, Caroline announced she was pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born on a beautiful spring morning in 1882. They named her Margaret Rose after Caroline's mother, but everyone called her Maggie. If possible, Cole was even more protective of his daughter than he had been of his son. Thomas was still active and involved, though he moved a bit slower these days. He loved having grandchildren to spoil, and Christopher adored his grandfather, following him around the ranch and hanging on his every word. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their resources, winters that were harder than usual, and the constant challenges of running a ranch in the Arizona territory. But they faced everything together, their love and partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Cole took Caroline back to the ridge where he had proposed. The children were with Thomas for the evening, giving them rare time alone. "Do you ever regret it?" Cole asked as they watched the sunset. "Marrying me, taking on this life?" Caroline looked at him in surprise. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A partnership, a family, a love I did not believe existed. How could I regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Cole said. "You gave up any chance at an easier life when you married me," Caroline laughed. "Easier is not better. This life, our life, is exactly what I want. You showed me that I did not have to carry every burden alone. You taught me to trust, to hope, to love. That's worth more than all the ease in the world." Cole pulled her close, kissing her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding day. "I love you, Caroline Fletcher, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you," Caroline replied, "forever and always." As they rode back to the ranch in the growing darkness, Caroline reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had been caring for her sick father alone, exhausted and without hope, when a cowboy had ridden up to her fence and said, "Let me help you both." Those simple words had changed everything, opening the door to a life she could never have imagined. The years continued to pass in a blur of activity and love. Christopher grew into a responsible young man who loved ranching as much as his father. Maggie was spirited and independent, reminding Caroline of herself at that age. 2 more children followed, another son named William and a daughter named Elizabeth, filling their home with noise and laughter. Thomas lived to see all 4 grandchildren, remaining active and engaged until a peaceful death at age 72. He passed away in his sleep, surrounded by family, having lived to see his daughter happy and his legacy secured. The loss was hard, but Caroline took comfort in knowing her father had spent his final years in joy, watching his family grow and thrive. Cole and Caroline ran the ranch together for decades, building it into one of the most successful operations in southern Arizona. They were known throughout the territory for their fair dealings and the quality of their livestock. But more than that, they were known for their devotion to each other and their family. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. As Cole and Caroline danced together under the stars, their grown children watching with their own families, Caroline thought about how far they had come. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, reading the expression on her face. "I'm thinking about that first day you rode up to the fence," Caroline said. "I was so scared and alone trying to handle everything myself. If you had not come along when you did, I don't know what would have happened." Cole pulled her closer. "I think you would have found a way. You're the strongest person I know. But I'm grateful every day that I got to be part of your life, that you let me help carry your burdens and share your joys." "We've had a good life together," Caroline said. "The best life," Cole agreed. "And it's not over yet. We still have years ahead of us, grandchildren to spoil, the ranch to run." He was right. They had many more good years together, watching their children build their own lives while remaining close to the family ranch. Christopher took over most of the daily operations, proving to be as capable as his father. Maggie married a doctor and moved to town, but visited often with her growing family. William became a lawyer, using his education to help protect ranchers' rights throughout the territory. Elizabeth married a neighboring rancher's son, keeping her close to home. Cole and Caroline settled into a comfortable retirement, still active, but allowing the next generation to take the lead. They spent their days working in the garden, riding the fence lines together, and playing with their numerous grandchildren. Every evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, holding hands and talking about their day. When Arizona became a state in 1912, they celebrated with their entire extended family at the ranch. It was a grand affair, with dozens of children and grandchildren gathered to mark the historic occasion. Cole, now 60 years old, gave a toast about perseverance and faith in the future. Caroline, 58, looked around at the family they had built and felt overwhelming gratitude. As they grew older, their love only deepened. They had weathered every storm together, celebrated every joy, and built a legacy that would last for generations. Their grandchildren grew up hearing the story of how they met, how a cowboy had offered help to a woman caring for her sick father alone, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love story for the ages. Cole and Caroline lived to see the modern world begin to emerge, with automobiles replacing horses and electricity coming to even remote ranches. But some things never changed. Their love remained constant, a beacon for their family and everyone who knew them. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered once again. There were now great-grandchildren running around the ranch, the newest generation of Fletchers. Cole and Caroline sat in places of honor, their hands still clasped together as they had been for 5 decades. Christopher stood to give a speech, his own hair now streaked with gray. 50 years ago, my father rode to my grandfather's ranch to repay a debt. He found my mother trying to save her father's life alone. What he did not expect to find was his own future, his partner, the love of his life. They've shown all of us what real love looks like. It's not just romance and passion, though they've always had that. It's partnership, respect, and the willingness to face life's challenges together. They've built not just a successful ranch, but a family legacy that will continue for generations. To Cole and Caroline Fletcher, the finest example of love and commitment any of us could ask for. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared by multiple generations. When everyone finally left or settled into guest rooms, Cole and Caroline walked slowly to their ridge one last time, just as they had done countless times over the years. 50 years, Caroline said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you rode up to that fence. Other times it feels like you've been part of my life forever. Both are true, Cole said. Every day with you has been a gift, Caroline. I meant what I said that first week. You're the strongest, most courageous woman I've ever known. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. We made it together, Caroline reminded him. That's always been our way, together. Together, Cole agreed, kissing her softly. They stood on the ridge watching the sun set over the land they loved, surrounded by the legacy they had built. 4 children, 16 grandchildren, and 12 great-grandchildren, all thriving because 2 people had been brave enough to accept help and wise enough to see love when it appeared. Cole lived to be 76, passing away peacefully in 1928 with Caroline holding his hand, just as she had held her father's hand so many years before. The difference was that Cole left this world knowing he was deeply loved, his legacy secured, his life well lived. Caroline grieved but did not break. She had learned long ago that love did not end with death. She remained on the ranch, surrounded by family, for another 8 years. She spent her time gardening, teaching her great-grandchildren to bake, and telling stories about the old days. She spoke often of Cole, keeping his memory alive for the younger generations who had never known him. On a warm September evening in 1936, Caroline Fletcher passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 82. She was laid to rest beside Cole on the ridge overlooking the ranch they had built together. their graves marked by simple stones that bore testament to a love that had changed the course of many lives. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren continued to run the ranch, passing down not just land and livestock, but the values Cole and Caroline had embodied. They told the story to each new generation, how a woman caring for her sick father alone had her life changed when a cowboy said, "Let me help you both," and how that simple offer of assistance had grown into one of the greatest love stories the Arizona Territory had ever known. The ranch still stands today, run by the sixth generation of Fletchers. In the main house, there hangs a photograph of Cole and Caroline, taken on their 50th anniversary. In it, they are looking at each other rather than the camera, their expressions full of love and understanding, their hands clasped together. Beneath the photo is a brass plate with an inscription, "Together always, 1878–1928." And on the ridge overlooking the property, where two graves rest side by side, the sunset paints the sky in brilliant colors every evening, a daily reminder of the love that began with a simple offer of help and grew into something eternal.